Hi, I'd like to welcome you to a new video book. This one is a book of short stories called Ballads, A Tinker's Dozen. And what I did in this book is find possible stories that might have spawned certain folk songs, songs that you probably recognize. You might not, but if not, you can check them out. But they're classic songs, and they've been around, some of them for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and they're all great. So what I'd like to do is read you the first part of the first story of the song, and we'll see what you think. Here we go. Once there were stories that were so true that people sang them like songs. And once there were songs that people told to keep their memories warm around the fire. These are some of the warm stories and the true songs. This first one is, "It Shall Come to Pass on a Summer's Day." It's a song of love and longing can fill the heart. A story of longing and love may show the heart empty of its broken pieces. Kansas, the Depression. In Cheever Township, Dickinson County, in the northeastern part of the state, on a little farm, just making the change from corn to winter wheat, equidistant from the little town of Manchester to the west, and the wide spots in the road that some folks called Industry to the northeast, and Buckeye to the southeast, lay John Canary's farm. The Canaries had owned their 160-acre farm since John Grandpop Canary staked out the land in 1865 after the war. Grandpop Canary had been a private in the Union Army who enlisted at age 14 in November of 1861, right after Virginia seceded, in the 4th Regiment Kansas Infantry in Pottawatomie County. The 4th was consolidated with the 3rd Kansas Infantry to create the 10th Kansas Infantry in April of the next year, but Grandpop always insisted that he had only served in the 4th. He fought in the Battle of Prairie Grove and skirmished against Quantrill, and was then sent to be a prison guard in Illinois until he was mustered out in August of 1865. He came to Dickinson County after the war and claimed 160 acres, thanks to the Homestead Act that Lincoln had signed in 1862. He lived on the land, built a home, and grew crops. When he died, his one remaining son, Marshall, of Grandpop's children, only Marshall and one daughter, Hannah, survived until adulthood. Hannah married a young man who was a drummer, lugging a big trunk full of mail-order catalogs full of beautiful things, and moved away to the west, where she and her husband opened a mercantile in Sacramento. Pops never saw her again, although she wrote every once in a while for a few years. The other two children both died. Amelia of cholera when she was 9, and Junior of smallpox when he was 6. Marshall inherited the farm and made a good living for himself and his wife Ida. They had 2 children, Nellie, Martha's aunt, who moved to Chicago to attend secretarial school and died a spinster, and John, Martha's father. Martha Canary sat on her porch out in the country. She shelled peas that she had picked from the garden, solid round pods, each about 4 inches long, which rattled when she shook them. She had filled a basket with the pea pods that had been dutifully pulling the stems down on each pod, stringing them. And as the pods popped open, she pushed the peas out into a big yellow and brown striped earthenware bowl. It was monotonous work, and Martha daydreamed about her true love riding up on his white charger to take her away from the farm as she sat in the rocking chair watching the clouds drift by. A front was coming in from the west. There'd be rain tonight. The only thing on the porch besides Martha, her rocking chair, and her papa's shotgun, just in case any young men decided to come a-courting Martha, was her old dog, Jane, a shaggy mutt that was so old she only wanted to lie in the sun. And if there wasn't any sun, she'd lie in the shade. The 160 acres of the Canary farm were typical of those of northeastern Kansas at the time. John Canary farmed 40 acres of corn, 40 acres of potatoes, and 40 acres of something new, winter wheat. He had a passel of about 20 big red Duroc hogs, and a smokehouse to preserve the pork he butchered. His father had built a chicken coop, which enabled the Canary family to raise a flock of 50 or so Rhode Island Reds, who hid from the elements in the little barn, where the family kept tools and whatever else did best if it rained on. The canaries sold the eggs when there were eggs, only eating eggs themselves on very special occasions, and ate the chickens that wouldn't lay. Most of the corn was fed to the hogs. The potatoes were fed to the people at almost every meal, and kept in the root cellar for winter when they would be nearly every meal. And the wheat and the hogs were sold for whatever profit they could bring. Mrs. Canary and Martha cooked dinner over an open fire in the spring, summer, and fall, under a lean-to behind the house, until a year or so ago when the family had saved up enough to order a cast-iron wood-burning stove that sat in a little room that had been added to the back of the kitchen. Papa was out in the cornfields, breaking the sod for planting, his 3 big gray Shire horses pulling a one-bottom plow. He would be able to break about 2 acres today by the time he came back for dinner. After the corn was planted in April, the potatoes could be planted in May, and the winter wheat harvested in June, the potatoes harvested in July, the corn harvested in August, and the winter wheat planted in September. Then it would be winter, long dark days filled with sewing, mending, and repairs, with a weekly trip to town for supplies from the general store or for a church meeting on Sundays. The porch looked down the long gravel driveway that led from the road to the Canary farmhouse. At the road, Grandpops, or maybe Marshall, had planted 2 elm trees flanking the driveway. Other than these 2 now great trees and an equally giant oak that shaded the farmhouse and threatened to topple onto it during cataclysmic summer storms that have made Kansas notorious, there was only the waving greenish gold of the wheat and the fence line that demarcated the realms of the chickens and the hogs and the barn and the stable where the draft horses were kept to catch the eye. A rope and board swing hung from a branch of the elm tree that had grown seemingly especially for that purpose. Martha had used to spend hours on that swing, flying through the air and dreaming of soaring off to another land. But that had been when she was a little girl. Now she was 15, too old for school and too far out in the country, and with her father and his shotgun too unapproachable, for the church boys to come courting, falling into the sleeping spinsterhood as much from indifference as lack of effort. But there, at the end of the driveway, was a car, coming toward her in the house, up the narrow pathway, through the wheat like a ship on the sea. The car Martha recognized as it drove closer was a sleek, almost new 1930 Ford Deluxe in gleaming silver. The driver pulled to a stop at the bottom of the porch steps and stepped out. He was wearing a double-breasted gray suit jacket and pants of Prince of Wales fabric with thick chalk stripes like someone out of a movie magazines that Martha loved to read. It was one of those Broadway suits like the New York swells wore. The suit had wide lapels, and as he unbuttoned his jacket so that he could put one foot up on the car's running board to tighten his shoelaces, Martha noticed that the jacket had 6 pewter buttons on each cuff, a maroon lining, and a maroon undercollar Meltons that matched his maroon felt fedora. He wore black and white ostrich leather brogue wingtips and brightly clashing blue and green silk argyle socks. His shirt was an ivory and gray window pane check with wide button-down lapels and French cuffs. Like a gentleman, he doffed his hat to her and bowed just the least little bit, his powder blue eyes never leaving hers. His hair was icy blonde and wavy like it had been marcelled. He stood in the dirt at the bottom of the stairs and said, "I'm Silky, miss. What's a doll like you doing in a place like this?" Martha's heart actually skipped a beat, like in a song, and she wasn't sure exactly what to say to this dreamy man. But Silky seemed to sense that her reticence was due to her excitement and was his to control. "I'm just a man at night, but I rob banks by day, and when I'm running from the law, my home is where I make it." Martha never said a word. But Silky knew what was fluttering in her heart and burning deep within the rest of her. He held out his hand to take hers. She put down the bowl of peas, stood up, took off her apron, and laid it carefully on the back of the rocking chair. She straightened her dress and patted her hair to smooth it. Then she walked down the steps off the porch, took Silky's hand and said, "My name is Martha. I'd like to go with you." Silky smiled and led her to the car. He was a gentleman and opened the door for her, waiting until she had settled herself on the big bench seat. Then he went to his side of the car, got in and turned on the big V8 and proceeded to roar out of the gravel drive in a shower of pebbles.